Let's say you have $2.5 million saved for retirement. How much can you spend? That's what we're going to talk about today. I'm Elliot Apple, founder and financial planner of Kindness Financial Planning, and today I want to show you a sample financial plan of someone who's diligently saved for retirement. We're going to work through their income sources, what they have coming in, what sort of portfolio they have saved, what sort of house they have, and see what are the opportunities to optimize their financial plan going forward, and how much can they actually spend from this portfolio throughout their life. So with that, let's jump into it. So you can see here we have Suzie and Gabe's sample, and right now they've got some money at the bank. There's $75,000 there. In terms of investments, they've done a great job saving. They've got a joint brokerage account worth about $500,000. Suzie was the primary earner in the relationship. She has almost $1.5 million saved. Gabe here has $500,000 in his IRA, and Gabe's Roth is worth about $50,000. So a lot of pre-tax money, some brokerage account money, and not much growing tax-free. In terms of their property, they've got a house worth about $1 million, and within this, they've told me their property taxes are about $10,000 annually. We are going to increase that every year by 3%. They pay about $2,500 in insurance for their property, and in terms of maintenance, we decided that we're going to allocate about $10,000 per year. Now, obviously, they're not going to spend this every single year, but when we factor in a new roof or siding or appliances or other things going on, we'll plan on spending about 1% of the value of the house. Common rule of thumb here is 1 to 3%. So with that, let's take a look at their goals. So we can see that they're basically to the point that they're going to retire. They decide, hey, we're going to do this. We're going to make it work no matter what. Generally, it'd be better if they came to me sooner to have this conversation to see, hey, when would be an opportune time to retire? But with this plan, we're going to see what they can shell out in terms of annual expenses. So here they've told me, let's go ahead and assume $5,000 as a baseline of just everyday spending. On top of that, spending on the house that we just allocated, they'd like to stay in their home for as long as possible. They've also told me that healthcare costs for them are going to be about $500 a month for each of them, so $6,000 a year. And on top of that, they do want to plan on some long-term care. They've had some issues in their family where family members have needed to go into assisted living and nursing homes, and they just want to make sure that we have some money allocated to that. So we're going to allocate $100,000 annually for the last 2 years of their life. And we know this is going to be a wrong figure. We don't know exactly what this is going to be come time that they might actually need it. They may never need it, or they might need it for an extended period of time if one of them develops dementia. But this is sort of, I think of it as a placeholder for them. And we can also see the sensitivity of the plan, that if we reduce this value or increase it, what happens with the annual spending and what they can choose to spend. They've also told me travel is pretty important to them. So for the first 10 years of this plan, they want to spend $15,000 per year, and we're going to inflate that at the normal inflation rate. They also want to give to family. That's really important. They want to help their adult children off on a better foot. And so we've outlined $10,000 per year, and that goes to the end of every plan. So this is from now until their death. They also want to take a dream trip with their family. They have thought, hey, I would love to go with my adult children and grandkids and just pay for everybody to go on this vacation. And they've told me that's going to be roughly $50,000. So we've got their baseline spending here. We've got a dream trip. We've got some extra travel. We've got gifting to family. These are the primary things that they want to do that's most important to them that we're going to incorporate in this plan and see, hey, does this work out? Does this level of spending work? And if so, can we increase it? What happens if we lower it? What does that mean in terms of passing on money to the next generation? In terms of income coming in, they don't have a pension of any sort, but they do have Social Security. Suzie worked for a long period of time, and their plan has them, Suzie claiming this at age 70 for $3,500 a month. And for Gabe, he's going to receive $2,500 a month, and he is going to claim that earlier at age 62. So something that I do for clients is we run a Social Security analysis to see, given their life expectancy, when does it make sense to claim? Is it early in life? Is it later in life? If you're married and there's an age gap, who should claim sooner? Who should delay? Should they both claim early? There's a lot of different scenarios to try to optimize benefits over their joint lives. You can see we don't have anything for savings just because they said they're going to retire now. And so we can take a look at this plan. This plan's going to run 1,000 different simulations and have really good stock market returns, really bad stock market returns. And it's going to say, what's the probability that we get to have that level of spending, keep our house, gift to family, take a dream trip, travel regularly for the first 10 years? What are the odds of success with that? And so we run this plan. And we can see right now it's 89% likelihood of success, which is a great plan. We don't actually want this to be 100%. Sometimes people come to me and go, hey, the number's not 100%. Why is that? Well, 100% is not great either. That usually means that you've worked too long, or you're not spending enough relative to your assets, or maybe you're taking a little too much investment risk and you could take less. So that is something to keep in mind, that 89% is actually a pretty good number here. It's 89% of the time we can support that level of spending and have more than $0 left over at the end of life. In fact, we can see here, where do they actually end with life at the end of life in terms of assets? You can see that if they were to retire today, they have roughly that 2.5, and we can see that they're not actually spending that much relative to their assets, because we can actually see their portfolio value increase over time. We can see right before they need long-term care, because they're the same age, they have roughly $7 million in future dollars, and then they're going to spend pretty significantly at that point. And so you can see that drop down in the last few years of life. So this is a good plan. When we look at the probability of success here, this is where we'd want to be. And we can see this in terms of visuals, that if we look at cash flows here, year by year, we can see what is happening. So this first year of retirement in 2026, they've got $21,000 coming in. That is Social Security. And you can see that's going to go up slightly each year. That was Gabe collecting his Social Security. They don't start to receive a lot more from Social Security until age 70 or 71, when you get a full year of this, just because we're doing partial years here. And then we can see that that's a pretty significant portion of their overall spending later in life. But early in life, we can see with their expenses, their living expense, so that baseline expense there of that $5,000 per year, or that $60,000, that's going to inflate. That was their baseline expense that they needed. Housing, so that was property tax, insurance, and maintenance every single year, also going up by inflation. Healthcare at that $12,000 per year, and that was just a baseline expense. You can see we also have long-term care, but that didn't kick into the end of that plan. So that $100,000 that we had allocated actually becomes more than $300,000, even more than $350,000 that last year combined between the two of them. So that $200,000's a lot more with that inflation. That's something to keep in mind as you plan for healthcare or just long-term care expenses in general, that the dollar value we need today is going to be probably a lot more in the future. So we've got their total expenses here allocated year by year in terms of that $94,500. We can tack that on to the goals, and within the goals we have that vacation and gifting amount, and you can see that vacation dropped off after those years, and then we're just assuming that they travel a little bit less. There's probably some flexibility in this plan to potentially go longer. We can measure that in a second, but we're just trying to get a baseline for, does this work out for Suzie and Gabe? But the gifting continues on until age 95. You can see also that the program's assuming some tax payments on this. Now we can layer in different tax planning strategies within their plan once we have the baseline. You'll see early on they're spending from the brokerage account. So we're assuming not very much in taxes. Once more Social Security starts to kick in, maybe some IRA withdrawals, they start to spend a little bit more. And then you can see once their required minimum distributions start, once they're age 75, they're paying a lot more in taxes. And as that RMD, or required minimum distribution, goes up, you can see here almost getting to $400,000. Their tax payment is also going to go up along the way with this. So with that, we can see the net flows is the amount they need from the portfolio. So they're spending almost $120,000. Social Security is going to provide about $21,000 of that. So they need about $98,500 from the portfolio. This is money coming out from the money that they have saved. And you can see there's a higher withdrawal in those early years, topping out about 157. But you can see once Social Security really starts to kick in earnest, they need less from the portfolio. So they're going to have a lower withdrawal rate once they have all of their income sources. And you can see here, they start to receive more money from the required minimum distribution than they're spending. So they have $84,000 coming in. It's assuming that their required minimum distribution is going to be about $141,000 at that time. and they don't actually need that full amount. So we're assuming some of this is probably actually going to be saved back into the portfolio at that time, just because there's an excess of what they need. And so visually, when we look at this, we can see that the withdrawal rate's pretty reasonable. When they first start out, it's less than 4%. And then once Social Security really kicks in earnest, their withdrawal rate goes down quite a bit. And the only reason their withdrawal rate goes up a little bit higher here is because those requirement and distributions kick in at that point. So this is looking like a very, very solid plan. When we look at the probability of success here, it's 89%. We can also look at two ends of the bell curve here of really positive to really negative outcomes and say at the end of the life, they're gonna end up somewhere between $0 in the worst case scenario up to roughly 15.7 million in a best case scenario. And that bluish purple line is the median there with about almost $4 million, 3.9. And so we can see this is a good outcome. So once we've measured that this plan looks really good, that's going to give them peace of mind going into retirement. But more importantly, we can start to analyze what do we need to layer in here to have them live their more ideal life. And this could be higher spending. So we could start to measure the impact of that. Maybe instead of that baseline $5,000 per month, we could say, what happens if you were to spend $6,000 a month instead? Well, you're going to end with less money, roughly 1.6 million, but for them, maybe legacy isn't the most important thing, that they're not hoping to leave $6.2 million, and 4.6 million would be plenty. We can also go back to the probability of success and say, hey, 76%, I'm still really comfortable with that because I know I can change this level of spending at some point in retirement. So maybe that's one lever that they're willing to adjust with their spending. Or maybe they say, hey, that dream trip is amazing. That $50,000 would be great. But what would happen if we tripled that? What if we spent $150,000 one year and really went all out, or did it for 2 years? How does that impact things? Well, you can see we went from 89% down to 85%. So still a very successful plan, even with that large increase. And the reason that this works out pretty well is it's not a relatively large increase for a long period of time. It's just one single year of an extra $100,000 for them. And given what they've saved, it's still a pretty low withdrawal rate and gives them enough assets to support this spending. Let's go ahead and set that back to that $50,000. I also want to show you the impact of long-term care. Maybe that's something that they're really worried about. And what happens if Gabe and Suzie both don't need it? What happens if one day they just pass away? How does that change the level of success? Well, we went from 89 to 97%, so very successful. And if we see what they have left in the plan, that's over $1.1 million, almost 1.2 left if they don't need to use those assets for long-term care. Conversely, what happens if they need it for 5 years, both of them? I'd say this would be an extreme event, but let's measure it and see what the impact is. Okay, there's about $1.8 million left. And how does that change the probability of success? Okay, we're starting to get a little bit lower here. This would mean maybe potentially changing a level of spending at some point if that was a primary concern. So that way they could have more left over in reserves for long-term care. But let's go ahead and set this back, just because I think 5 years each or 10 years total is pretty unreasonable for that, particularly that 100,000 plus the other spending, plus never using the equity that they have in their house. We've excluded that through all of these plans. So that is also a backup that we'll have a conversation about. So here's where you can see lots of different levers that you could pull. We could look at travel and increasing that either more for the same amount of time, or we could extend that travel out to more years. But this tells me that if we go back to the cash flow per year, if they want to retire today and they want to spend roughly $120,000 a year to start with that, you can see with their goals here and gifting, that's going to change a little bit just because we had that larger vacation here. If you were wondering what that figure was a little bit higher, that was that dream vacation. But if they want to spend roughly $120,000 per year, this plan works out really well. They can spend that roughly $10,000 per month, no issue with the pooled assets that they have, and they can even increase this. We just looked at that. And in terms of net flows, sometimes questions come up about, well, I'm spending more from the portfolio early in retirement. Is that okay? And yes, we just measured that as an outcome. That's okay. And that's common for people who retire early who aren't yet maybe receiving their pension or Social Security. In their case, they're just getting Social Security, not a pension source. But it's okay to lean on that portfolio early in retirement. And by allowing one of them to wait to collect Social Security, they're allowing that benefit to accrue to get that higher payment. And then they're going to have less of a need from the portfolio for a lot longer period of time. So Social Security is helping them out to extend the longevity of the portfolio. So for them, we can just have more conversations about how do we now layer in tax strategies such as Roth conversions. We saw with their RMD, they're not going to need the full amount. So maybe there's some charitable giving that they'd like to do. Maybe that's an important thing. Or maybe they want to pass on more money tax-free to the next generation. At the beginning of this plan, they didn't have much money in tax-free assets growing. So this is something that we can measure each year and say, hey, maybe we're willing to pay a certain rate of tax this year and fill up a tax bracket to then allow that to grow tax-free and maybe move on to the next generation also tax-free. The other thing I would say that I mentioned briefly earlier is that ideally, they would have come a little bit sooner. We saw that their plan works really well, and maybe they don't necessarily want to spend more money or take a more expensive dream vacation. Maybe they could have retired a year or 2 or 3 years ago and it would have been okay. Maybe that would have been a really great thing to know, so they didn't need to keep saving and they could have enjoyed more time with their grandkids at that point. So that's why it's really important to analyze this and look at your financial plans sooner than retirement. Don't wait until the month or the year that you're like, hey, I want to retire now. There's some planning that you can do beforehand. And in my experience, a lot of people who have done great planning and done a good job at saving, they have more flexibility to retire a little bit sooner than they ever anticipated. That's a common theme when I have these conversations of, oh, I didn't realize I have that flexibility, or I'm on a really good path. And just having that peace of mind that they're on the right track can mean a world of difference. If you found this helpful and you'd be curious for a financial plan for yourself, there are links in the description down below to schedule an intro call with me. I'm happy to have a conversation about your individual situation and see how this could potentially apply to you. Otherwise, hopefully you found something helpful in this video, and stay tuned for future videos. Thanks for watching.